Hey, what's up guys? БJ Tech here, and today we're going to be continuing the build on our water-cooled rebuild, the Fantex Enthus 719. And more specifically, today we are actually going to be bending the rigid tubing for this build. And that should be the last part of this build. So I know the last time I did some water-cooled build videos, I just kind of threw in some B-roll and just kind of showed, different scenes of me putting the build together. In this video, I kind of want to go through some of the tools I'm using, as I have right here. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on, and then show you guys some of the tips and tricks I use to put together a rigid tubed water-cooled PC. I'm definitely not an expert at it, and I don't have a whole lot of experience in it, but this is going to be the second time that I'm doing it. The first time went pretty well, and I think our bends are going to be a little bit easier today on this build. A little bit more straightforward. So I'm just going to kind of take you guys through the process, some tips and tricks I use. So starting off with some of the supplies I'm going to be using, and if you guys are working on a water-cooled build, more than likely supplies that you'll be needing. Going into the tools, I actually bought a toolkit from Thermaltake that included a cutter, some different jigs to kind of shape your bends a little bit easier, and then it comes with a silicone tube which you'll use to put inside your rigid tubing, and then once you heat it up, this prevents the tube from crushing itself once you make the bend, and then you pull it out once your bend's made. So definitely stuff that's needed. The cutter they have is very nice. It's easy to use. It's not necessarily, you can use something more like a PVC cutter where it just snips, but this actually has a wheel that scores it, and you just run the blade around the tube. So it works really well. You get some clean cuts. Going into the fittings, I am using all the Бヂ multi-link fittings, and I have quite an assortment of those. These are ones where it's just a single connection. We got some that are a 90-degree double connection, and then some of those too that have a thread on them. So a little bit of an assortment of the Бヂ multi-link fittings. I ran them in the last build and they worked really well. Very high quality fittings. So yeah, we're just using those again for this build. It's actually the same exact fittings that I had in the last build, so just kind of reusing stuff on that. The tubing we're using is Thermaltake PETG tubing. I usually go with PETG just because it's ease of use. From what I've heard, it doesn't look as good as acrylic, but it's much easier to cut, it's much easier to work with, and it's rigid, so it's a very good option for just getting into rigid tube water cooling. So that's what I went with again this time. I was very happy with it the last time. And then lastly, for bending the rigid tubes, you're going to need a heat gun. I'm actually borrowing this one, thanks to my sister for letting me borrow it. This is just a kind of cheaper heat gun from Cable, but I definitely recommend one that has some sort of stand on the back or a pedestal, so you can just set it upright and you don't have to worry about leaning it up on anything, because you definitely don't want to do that. You want it nice and stable and on a flat surface, so then you can just set it down and then work on your bends up above. So it works really well. Alrighty guys, so first thing's kind of loop planning, which can be really tricky, and a lot of times you can second guess yourself on things, or at least I know I do. Like I said, we're going to keep this loop pretty simple. We have our pump and reservoir combo, so I kind of like to think of things where the loop starts. So for the loop, it's going to start at your pump and reservoir area, so specifically your reservoir, because that's what you fill. That's going to feed your pump. In this case, this is a combo, so it's all in one. So this is our starting point. We have an inlet and an outlet, and we're going to start off from the out, because that's where the water is first going to get moved through the loop. It's going to get pushed through this outlet into whichever component you choose to go to. It makes the most sense, and it did in the last build too, to go straight from the outlet to the graphics card. So that's what we're going to do again. And it's a pretty straight shot. So we're just going to have a piece of PETG. I'm going to do a 90-degree bend and feed it right up to the graphics card. And then from there, I think I'm going to go straight to the CPU. And then from the CPU, we're going to get it into this radiator. I'm not sure which port on the radiator we're going to do. We have one back here and one up here. And then, so I think I'm probably going to choose this outer one, and then in the inner one I'll have that go to this radiator and then back to our pump. So it's a pretty straightforward loop as far as the design goes. So for the first bin, like I mentioned, we're going to go from the pump reservoir combo to our graphics card. And I know right off the bat the fittings I'll be using are just the regular multi-link fittings. So I'm going to go ahead and just thread those in and they'll be good to go. The rest of them, I usually would say to go ahead and just throw the fittings on the components, but we really don't know if it'll be easier using a different type of fitting for each one. I mean, you could always swap it out, but I'm just going to go ahead and do the ones that kind of do it as I go this time. So to make things a little bit easier, guys, I did end up just kind of turning the pump a little bit. That way we have a straight shot from our pump to the graphics card, and I can adjust that as we need. So then all we'll need is a 90-degree right here to go straight up to the graphics card. So the first bend we're going to do is going to be that 90-degree going up to the graphics card. So I'm basically just going to kind of measure out how much I need from the pump fitting here to the graphics card. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and go past it. I'm not going to make an exact measurement of where I need to be. I'm just going to make a 90, make sure I have enough room on both sides, so that way I can just cut it to adjust it. So if I measure it very close, there could be a chance that I make it too short and then we won't be able to use it. So if I just give myself some leeway on both sides, I can just trim the ends in small increments to make sure they fit, make sure this bend fits right. So guys, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to bend PETG. Sorry if it's a little noisy, it is just started raining, so it's pretty hard too, so hopefully it won't interfere with the video too much. But so I kind of have the area of where I'm going to make my 90. I have my silicone insert in the PETG, so I'm just going to go ahead. I put my heat gun a little bit past the halfway mark, and then I'm just going to put it to setting 1, let it heat up for a little bit. Not too long, but it heats up pretty quick. So then once it's nice and warm, you're basically just going to take this, put it over top, and you're just going to kind of twirl the PETG and kind of, I just go in like a up and down motion close to and away from the heat gun. So I just kind of work it like this, and it can take a little bit, but you'll know right away once it gets to the right temperature, the PETG instantly becomes malleable and it starts to flex. And then you're just going to want to slowly bend it to the degree you're trying to get, the angle you're trying to get. And you can see it's kind of starting to get a little bit flexible. It's starting to get a little malleable. So we're just going to keep working it. And now you can see it's getting pretty flexible, so we can go ahead and start the bend a little bit. I'm just going to slowly start to bend it to a 90, kind of heat up, and I won't twirl it as much. I still will, but instead I'll kind of focus it more on the sides of the tubing in all areas. And when we're at this angle, we can still spin it, which is nice. But once we get more towards the 90, it'll get a little bit more awkward to spin. But you can see now it's getting really flexible. And you really want to apply some heat on the outside of the bend, because that's what's going to be stretching a lot when you make this bend. And the inside will stretch, and you'll want that heated up too, because if you're under temperature on your bend, you'll notice you'll get kinks in your tubing. And then when you overheat the tubing, a lot of times you'll get bubbles. So there are telltale signs of when you're underheating and overheating your PETG tubing. But yeah, this is getting pretty flexible, so I'm just going to slowly keep going, heat up that outside and the inside, just because that's what's going to be stretching and squishing the most. And we're about there to a 90. Looks pretty good. And just heat it up, work it a little bit more, and then we're going to line it up with our jig, make sure we're on point. So that's pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and line it up with our jig. And on these Thermaltake jigs, I think they're rated for smaller tubing. So this 16 mil outer diameter tubing doesn't fit too good in the channel, so I just actually lined it up on the edge, and that's a pretty accurate measurement of the bend. So, and as you can see, we have our first 90-degree bend. Looks pretty good. You can see I don't see any signs of kinking or bubbling. It all looks pretty smooth. And this definitely serves as a perfect example of kind of what I was talking about when giving yourself leeway on both sides of the tube. So when I hold this up to about the area where it'll sit in the fitting, you can see we have some excess. Our fitting on the graphics card is actually right here. So, and then basically I'm just going to trim back here to get this length to where we need. And I definitely recommend too taking off the threaded part for the multi-link fittings, so that way you can get a better idea of where your tube will actually sit inside the fitting, just like that. And then that way you can have a little bit better idea of where your tube's gonna sit rather than sitting it on top trying to guess. So kind of guesstimating about right there is where I need to cut, but I'm gonna give myself some leeway to be nice and safe. So I'll probably cut somewhere around here first and then just keep working my way, cutting very small increments. So cutting the tube with this type of tube cutter, basically you just want to line it up in the rollers, and then you're gonna tighten down the wheel that has the score blade on it. I don't tighten it too much, so I get it to where it's just a little snug and it just kind of hangs on, and then I just start rotating it around the tube. So I just continue to spin it around the tube and slowly tighten it, because I've noticed if you kind of jump the gun and tighten it too much just to get the cut through, it tends to crush the tube a little bit and you don't get as clean of a cut, and you'll actually it'll make a very kind of odd end. So if you just spin it around the tube and then slowly tighten it as you go, and the more runs you do around the tube, the better cut you're more than likely going to have. And as you see, we ran it around there pretty good. We got a nice clean cut. The Thermaltake kit that I mentioned earlier, the tool kit, it does come with a sanding tool like this, where you would stick the tube in the end and twist it to shave it. I've heard this works much better with acrylic, and when I've used it on PETG, it really doesn't work that well. It kind of chatters the end really bad and kind of thins out the walls, and that's really what we don't want around the fitting. Alrighty guys, so we have our first bend cut and cleaned up. And as you can see, once I mount this, kind of locks right into place. And that's a lot of times how I like to do my cuts and my bends. Going through that process, you tend to get this fit where it stays there by itself and just like very precision. And even if I put some pressure on it, and it's not even held in by the collars yet, so it's just sitting there by itself, but the cuts and everything line up so well that it kind of locks itself in. And that's how I always like to do my stuff. And there you have it, everyone, our first bend in place. Looking good, looking good. Locks in nice like I showed you guys. So that's pretty much it as far as the process for bending the PETG tubing. It's pretty simple and it's pretty straightforward. It can take a little bit of practice, you know, heating up your tubing right and not overheating it, not underheating it, but once you get it down, you'll get it down just right to where you'll get, you know, pretty perfect bends. And then cutting it's not too bad if you have very simple bends in your loop. Nothing like this was pretty simple, just a 90-degree, so that's not too bad. But there are more complex bends you can do in a system, which definitely adds a little bit of difficulty when it comes to cutting and bending and all that stuff. So we're gonna go ahead and continue with the other bends. I'm not sure if I'm gonna get them all done tonight, but I'm gonna go ahead and try to do at least the one from the graphics card to the CPU and one from a radiator to the other radiator. I'm gonna try to get those done and we'll see what happens. Alrighty guys, well I hope you enjoyed the video. Got some good tips and tricks on how to bend PETG tubing and build a rigid tube water-cooled PC. Hopefully you enjoyed some of those B-roll sequences of me filling up the loop, because those turned out pretty cool. The reason why I'm not going into more details on this right now is I assembled everything and the PC doesn't actually work right now. And I'm not sure what went wrong, but the motherboard actually doesn't seem to be getting any power. So basically after I fully assembled the PC, I flipped on the power switch, everything seemed normal. The RGB lights came on the motherboard, which is totally normal and is always a good sign. I powered it on, noticed that my fans weren't running, and my power switch actually did not work going to the top of the case. That switch up there. So just a very small little things that I missed. So I powered down the PC, rewired the power switch, and then I noticed I did not have my 12-volt SATA power that controls the hub to the fans. I actually didn't have it hooked up. So I plugged that stuff back in, hooked the computer back up, hit the power switch on the power supply. Everything still seemed normal. I hit the power button, everything came on, and then just shut off. And unfortunately, I haven't seen any RGB come back out of the motherboard since. So I've been running through a lot of troubleshooting techniques, making sure my power supply was still working. I was hoping it was just the power supply that was having issues for some odd reason, but it wasn't. So I did run the jumper back on the power supply, and it does run my peripherals, all the fans run. So the power supply is definitely okay. It's just whenever we flip that power switch on, the motherboard, it just doesn't seem to be getting any power. But the next morning after this happened, I was of course messing with the PC a little bit more. And I didn't realize on the back I/O shield where I have a BIOS reset button and a clear CMOS button, the clear CMOS button would blink green every once in a while. So there still is some signs of life in the motherboard. So seeing that light blinking on the clear CMOS button, I did end up trying to clear the CMOS and reset it that way to see if the motherboard was just locked down, didn't like certain voltages or something going to it. I tried that in a couple different ways, and still I'm getting the same results, and that clear CMOS button is just, it'll blink green every once in a while when I have power running to the system and the power switch on the power supply. So there might be something that I'm missing, and this motherboard has just locked itself out due to some circumstance of maybe voltages it didn't like. I'm wondering, I mean, the only thing I changed from the first time I booted it up to the second time was I moved the power switch to the proper spot on the motherboard, and I also did plug in the fan. So I don't know if the fans had messed it up. These are higher powered fans, but I checked all the voltages on them. It is a 12-volt hub. We have 12-volt fans. I mean, everything seemed normal there, but you never know. So that's going to kind of conclude this video, guys. I definitely want to be transparent with these videos as much as I possibly can and let you know any issues that I'm having with my builds and what's going on, and maybe ways that we can fix things from happening like this, or you know, how to fix this problem. I'm going to be digging into this more and more, and I might be contacting ASUS as far as like warranty stuff goes, and more things I can troubleshoot on it that I might have not found in my research. Definitely stay tuned, as I will be having some videos following up with this build once we get it fixed and back up and running, and I'll be letting you guys know, you know, what exactly went wrong, how we fixed it, and how we went about getting this machine back up and running. So definitely keep an eye out for those videos. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more tech related content and PC hardware related videos, make sure to give us a subscribe. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and if you'll excuse me, I think I'm going to go throw up now. See ya.